I feel like we need to talk about Judas. Why? Because we just celebrated the most important event in Christian history, like we do every year. And most churches, most Christian organizations highlight Good Friday as well, the day that Jesus was actually crucified. But prior to that, there's something called Maundy Thursday. It's Great Thursday. It's the day when Jesus was betrayed. It's the night of his Last Supper. And in it, there's this really interesting exchange where Jesus is there with his disciples in the upper room, and they're sharing this incredibly intimate exchange, him knowing what he was about to endure. But he outs his betrayer. And us as readers, we know who that is, because every single time that the names of the disciples are listed, or Judas was just called out in particular by name throughout the text, he is subtext as the one who would betray him. We know what has been coming. And in fact, if you read John's gospel, he even gives us added details about Judas in the exchange with the woman who anoints Jesus' feet, saying that the money for that perfume could have been sold for a large sum, about 2/3 of a year's salary potentially, and then that money given to the poor. And then underneath that it says that he just wanted to help himself to that money because he carried the money bag of the disciples, and that he used to help himself out of those inclusions as well. He was seeing an opportunity for profit. Well, so the thing about all of that is we have seen past the veil through the narrative polemic. We know what Judas has been, what Judas is. But the disciples, and this is the critical thing, the 12 men in the room had no idea. They were completely caught off guard, not only by the accusation that someone would betray Jesus, but they were at a loss for clues when it comes to who that might have been. They had no idea. And that gives us a little bit of a lens into something of that Judas is not the slime ball, let's say, that we would like him to have been. I mean, and what I mean by that is, I don't think there's any more loathsome or despised character in all of history or in all of literature than him. That when that we use his name as a byword by which to label those who have betrayed our trust, or those that are not deserving of our trust to begin with. That in fact, if someone is on the opposite side of a political issue even, you would say that they're betraying our country, that they're a Judas to our country. That's who he is, and a lot of that is earned, and I've talked about some of the credentials for him having heartily earned that reputation, but it's important for us to note that he fit in with the disciples. He was there because they expected him to be there. He was there because in a lot of ways he belonged, you might say. That in a room, keep in mind that the captains of this team was 4 fishermen who would have been ceremonially unclean because of the fact that when they dragged the nets out of the ocean and put them on shore to sort out the fish, they would have been handling numerous fish. If you don't know, in Levitical law, it specifically describes you could have fish with fins and scales, but anything that only has fins or that only has scales couldn't eat it. And so if they pulled anything up out of the ocean or out of the Sea of Galilee or that anywhere they happened to have been that wasn't fins and scales, them touching that thing, like a Jew touching a pig or a Jew handling shellfish would have been made ceremonially unclean. They weren't elite. The next thing would be that there was Simon the Zealot. The zealot word there, it's Sicarii, which is Sicar as a form of short curved blade. It meant dagger men. It was people that would try to isolate Roman soldiers or Roman sympathizers and would murder them if given the opportunity. They were violent and dangerous. And then you have, in this same group, right, Matthew the tax collector, a Roman sympathizer. So we have a little bit of a group of people here that there are eligible candidates. If somebody was going to betray their own master, it would be somebody known for carrying around a sword to kill Romans, right? It would be somebody who had betrayed his people before, selling them out for money, right? It would be one of them, not Judas. But here's the really, really interesting thing. When this is exposed in front of all of them, and when we're reading the text, we see, especially throughout John's description of it, that Jesus is very explicit. The man who dips his hand into the dish with mine, the man whose hand is on the table with mine. It was the man who would betray me. That he was being very explicit, saying like, it's that guy, but they don't get it. Because they couldn't bring themselves to believe that Judas, of all people, would do it. Remember, they trusted him enough to put their money in his hands for safekeeping. That, think about who you as an individual would be willing to put your money into. Who would you trust with your debit card? Who would you trust your wallet to, your purse to, or even, let's say, your children, or your who would you give a emergency key to your house to? That's a person who has the refrigerator rights, is sometimes what these kind of things are budgeted into as a summary of how you treat this person. Like, who would you allow that way into your home? Who would you travel with? And with that kind of trust, because most of us don't know very many people that way. Most of us need to be tricked into accidentally releasing our private information to them. So who would you trust that way? Because that's who Judas was in rank among them. It's even more interesting how that they didn't let the guy who handled money for a living handle their money. Maybe it's because they were a little sore off the idea that he had been sold out to the Romans, that they still couldn't break their heart open enough to him. They hadn't extended the kind of trust to him necessary to allow, yeah, you can carry my money too. But Judas, he was that guy. Keep in mind as well that later tonight, Peter is going to betray Jesus not once, but 3 times. And then also consider the fact that James and John had got their mother involved to ask them, the teacher, the one whom they loved, to ask Jesus, listen, when you enter into your kingdom, you need to give a special space to my 2 sons, James and John, the ones who had asked Jesus for permission to call down fire on a Samaritan village. Of course, that interaction resulted in the same thing this interaction resulted in, and that's them bickering over who the greatest was, saying that James and John don't deserve that rank, I do. But at the same time, they were asking Jesus, listen, who would betray you? Is it I? They all considered themselves as guilty before they considered Judas as guilty. We have a lot to learn about this in this instance. The first is is that not all dangerous people, not all predators look like dangerous people. Most of them look like us. They look like all the rest of us. This is why every few days it seems like there's another headline talking about a priest or a pastor, a camp director, a hospital administrator, a school administrator, a school teacher, or a corporate underboss, magnate, politician's aide, whoever it is, that's guilty of some sort of impropriety, indignity, usually involving money or sex. It happens all the time, and we ask ourselves, how is this person able to do this? How are they able to do it undetected? And how are they able to do it undetected for as long as they have done it? Because it's always for years, usually. And of course, we can't ignore the fact that there are systems in place designed by people like this to protect people like this from scrutiny. That is a true thing. But in such a small, intimate gathering like this, we're talking about 13 men having an evening meal together, celebrating the Passover. It's unlikely they would have had the kind of social constructed kind of defenses necessary to shield an individual that had committed such egregious acts as Judas is doing and has done. He was just covert. And we have to keep that in mind, that how much do you really know the people whom you have given your trust to guard the things most precious to you? How much do you really trust that Uber driver when you get into his car? There's entire apps designed around the idea of that if you feel a little sketchy around someone who's driving you, to help track your GPS movements, right? We've realized that we gave a lot of people trust under the guise of anonymity, hoping someone else has done the investigation necessary, a background check. When we punt these things off to the FBI or the Department of Justice or the denomination or the whoever it is that we've done it to, we've given them this other, we've just delegated it. Well, surely they've done their research, and then we find out in an investigation the background check was never done. The paperwork was never filed. It was lost in an administrative maze. And all of this, and it turns out those things that we have put our trust in to protect us are not very reliable. They're not very robust. And so these predators are allowed to live within the weeds around us, and they devour the flock. This is especially important for Christians if you want to be in leadership of any kind. Who have you trusted with the most precious things in your life? Your pastor. There's the staff underneath your pastor. The people that are running the Christian schools you send your children to. The ones that are downstairs or off in the annex with children that belong to you, that belong to the families you care about. Who are those people? And what are they doing? Who's watching the cameras to make sure that what is and is not happening is and is not happening? Who's doing it? Because if you are simply entrusting that someone else is taking that responsibility, you have failed as a parent. You have failed as a disciple. You are not holding your leaders accountable, and you have delegated the level of leadership that is accountable only to you unrighteously. That just because someone said that they are trustworthy does not mean that they are in fact trustworthy. The thing about Jesus and Judas, their story, is that it is a betrayal. In order to be betrayed, you must first have a foundation of trust to subvert. We have to remember that he snuck past the, let's say, outposts of trust in order to betray it. And that's happening every day in every church, in every school, in every organization, in every intramural athletics organization, every Boy Scout and Girl Scout troop. It's happening everywhere, and it just hasn't been discovered yet because these people are cunning. They're smart. They are not stupid. And they, in a lot of ways, they think that we're the stupid ones. And in many ways, they're right to think that we are. That we're naive. That we're too trusting. In a lot of ways, they're right. We are too trusting. We are too naive. And we tend to run away from that in another dangerous direction, to saying that our trust has been betrayed, and therefore we will never trust again. Realizing that, yes, there are dangerous people out there, but not all of them are dangerous. And that the solution to this problem is not absolutism, not embracing everyone, not just giving freely trust without making them earn it, but also it's not being enclosed either. It's not being iron-fisted either, that you need discernment. You need to be constantly refining the manner in which you test those whom you have trusted and refining the people before you give it to them. You need to constantly be very careful, slow to give trust until someone demonstrates with a pattern of behavior that they are worthy of that trust, but also being very careful in how you carry that trust. That you are very refined and defined in the parameters and boundaries of your relationship, and that you do not just leave them. If you imagine that just because you draw out boundaries does not mean that the grass isn't going to overgrow those boundaries at times, and that you're going to have to go back and maintain them again later. A lot of relationships erode between two people with the sensation of betrayal due to the fact that, yes, you laid a boundary at one point in time, but time has proceeded since then. And that the weeds overgrow it. And then over time you build this resentment towards this person because they keep trotting over a boundary that they didn't even realize was there still, or ever was there. Or often people just bypass each other like ships in the night, never communicating their boundaries at all, and then wondering why they've been so deeply wounded and offended all of the time. So all of that about Judas is, eventually, he does get found out. And all of these betrayers, these vile persons, eventually all of them get found out. The question is, what will you be found guilty of when they find out who they all are? Because remember, the disciples all believed themselves just as likely to be guilty as he was.